So I often start in terms of looking at where do I think is the most important piece of the diet connection. So that I think that everybody in this audience will agree that obesity, heart disease, high blood cholesterol, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes are all lifestyle diseases, and they all have a diet component. Anyone out there who doesn't agree with that piece of it? Okay, so we're all going to agree that we can do things proactively in terms of reducing the likelihood that we develop those disorders. What I think most people don't recognize is that, did you know that those diseases are all dementia risk factors? So we're saying that individuals with high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and obesity, because of the metabolic disturbances of those disorders, are at higher dementia risk. So that we can start talking now in terms of where diet fits in, where lifestyle fits in, because we're talking about a host of chronic diseases that in and of themselves are detrimental to brain function. And I think what's really wonderful in terms of having been in this area of research for more years than I probably care to admit, is that when I began my research career, we wouldn't have the Diabetes Association and the Heart and Stroke Foundation in the same room as the Alzheimer's Society, because people were thinking that they were actually looking at independent disorders and not recognizing that we're all in the same game together. And so that I think that as the science has really started to meld these, that you're seeing much more cooperation and collaboration and collegiality across a whole host of chronic disorders, because people are recognizing that when we look at the health status of the population, while they may be coming from it from the perspective of being concerned in terms of type 2 diabetes, or alternatively being concerned in terms of heart disease and stroke or Alzheimer's disease, that we all need to be communicating the same message. And that ultimately, when we look at what we need to communicate at a public health level, that the story is the same across all those disorders. Eat well, keep your weight down, make sure you don't develop high blood pressure, that we are really talking in terms of a commonality here. So it's not surprising that if we're saying that the Western chronic diseases are actually are themselves dementia risk factors, that what we think of that typical Western diet that's high in fat, low in fiber, low in fruits and vegetables, that what we call a typical North American diet, not surprising that I'm going to tell you by now that this is also not good for our brains. And I will tell you that we have lots and lots and lots of data coming from both human studies and animal studies, excuse me, showing that individuals that are consuming Western style diets more likely to develop those chronic disorders that we talked about in terms of cholesterol, blood pressure, and diabetes, and that they're more likely to show either signs of cognitive decline if you're looking at an animal model, or overt dementia if you're looking in human populations. So that's the negative side of the story. But we do have a glass that's half full, because equally the opposite is true. That we know that diets that are rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and fish associate with better preservation of cognitive function. So that it's arguing that the more you can shift your diet into one that is more based in plant product, including and replacing things like red meat with fish, going on the whole grains, that not only are you doing something good for your heart and good for your blood pressure, that you're doing something good for your brain at the same time. So when we look in terms of trying to understand that there has been a lot of work in terms of trying to really understand how nutrition is impacting the brain. So I think it's important to realize that where I've started off in a base in terms of saying, let's start first by saying, if we look below the neck, that we know that a lot of lifestyle chronic disorders that are occurring where your doctors are predominantly diagnosing them below your neck, that they're actually ultimately over time going to be increasing your dementia risk unless you're making sure that you're managing those disorders well. So that's a kind of a secondary effect of diet as it helps preserve brain function. But we also know that the nutrients that we eat are having a direct impact on the health of the brain itself. So we're saying that diet can either directly affect the brain or it can do so through these chronic disorders. So if we look in terms of where are our direct effects, well, one is that we often think in terms of insulin, particularly as it relates to diabetes, in that diabetes is associated with insulin dysfunction, and it means that your blood glucose levels go too high. Through the last decade, we've learned fundamentally that the brain also requires appropriate insulin function. So the brain is not using insulin to help it metabolize glucose, but we know that insulin is absolutely essential for us to be able to form memory. So that in an individual with diabetes where we know that their brain insulin function is not performing or is not working as well as it should be, that it's not surprising that one of the very early signs in terms of a brain effect of diabetes is a poor memory function. So that one of the things that we need to be able to do is make sure that we're doing things that are going to help us sustain that function of insulin in the brain. The next then is that the nutrients that we require in order to be able to maintain this brain plasticity that I was talking about, stimulating our nerve cells to make new connections, all of those types of things, that we require chemicals in order to be able to tell nerve cells that it's going to do that. And our nutrients are one of many ways that we can make sure that that environment around the nerve cells is correct in order to be able to help with stimulating that. So it's helping us in terms of providing the environment to support that brain plasticity. The brain, like other tissues, suffers from inflammation, and it can also suffer from oxidative damage, and we know that that's associated with a number of different disorders in the body. And clearly, making sure that we have enough antioxidants in our body, that we're managing kind of inflammatory responses is going to be another thing that diet is going to help us with. And then another key is that it's helping us maintain the health of our blood vessels. And you can imagine the brain consumes a lot of energy and a lot of glucose, and we need healthy blood vessels in order to be able to deliver those nutrients and oxygen to the brain. So what I'm saying is that as we start to look at what is a healthy diet doing for us, it's actually functioning across a number of different domains in terms of helping maintaining insulin signaling, keeping down oxidative damage, making sure that our blood vessels are working properly, making sure that we have the right chemical environment to continue to support the plasticity that's needed for cognitive reserve. So given that, it's not surprising that we're going to need a number of different nutrients in order to be able to support that broad host of different functions. And that's what I'm arguing, that I don't philosophically believe in a single nutrient. Because I may take a nutrient that's going to help me keep down oxidative damage, but my goodness, I want to make sure I have healthy blood pressures and that my insulin signaling is working and that I'm going to maintain cognition and plasticity. So we have a huge host of a number of different nutrients that are important, and so trying to find the magic nutrient is not going to help us across a large variety of different biologic processes.